This is the Freeheel Life Podcast, episode number 134. I'm your host, Josh Madsen, coming at you from the Freeheel Life shop in Salt Lake City, Utah. What's up? Good to be back, and always fine to be back on a fresh Monday morning, ready to go and talk about Telemark skiing as always. The best turn, the most OG turn on snow. You all know it. You guys do it. So do I. And that's what we're going to talk about today, like every Monday. So if you haven't subscribed to the podcast, please do. And I'll be back next week with episode number 135. And so on into infinity, because there's never an end to talking about Telemark because it's so amazing. So as far as newsroom and notes, we're still jamming here at the shop. We've got a ton of rad new lifestyle stuff coming out. Can't wait to show you some of that. We've been hard at work really pushing that and improving upon our fine lifestyle line of wear. Second batch of protectors is up for sale right now. Our amazing skis that we started producing last year, and we are taking a less underground approach, if you will. They are now on the website, and you can get a hold of them at freeheellife.com. There's the Protector 95, the Protector 105, and you can read all about it there. There's some awesome source material and helpful resources to get you in the groove about what's going on there and see if it's a good fit for you. And we would love to help you get on those. They are handmade in Salt Lake at Freeheel Life. So if you haven't paid attention to all that, there are various podcasts, YouTube videos, and the like, so you can also be a full protector of the turn along with us and the rest of the FHL crew. Other than that, we're just jamming along. Easy to keep track of us. Sign up for the mailing list. It's always a good way to keep tabs on things every week, and also social media. If you like to burn your day up looking at your phone and scrolling and flipping and sliding and whatever you do. Whatever's going on, we're there. So today I wanted to address something that a listener sent in. And this is old Bobby T wrote in. Like I always say, write to podcast at freeheellife.com if you got ideas. And old Bobby T did. He came through this week. And I'm just going to kind of read the synopsis of what he said. And that's kind of what we're going to jump into today. So he wrote in and said, there's one thing I often hear you say that probably deserves its own episode. We need to get away from 75 millimeter NTN, TTN, TTS, and just have quote unquote Telemark. And Bobby T says he agrees with me 1,000%. It's confusing, intimidating for customers and manufacturers alike. So the big question is, how the heck do we get there? And he thought it might be nice if I elaborate on why this is necessary and kind of hear my vision of a roadmap back to just Telemark. And I thought this was a great, thank you, Bobby, for first listening to the podcast like all of you out there. I always enjoy getting these questions or comments about sort of, things that you've tuned in on and that I've maybe said frequently or in certain episodes, and then having that desire to hear maybe some additional context or my opinion. And I always really appreciate that. It means a lot to me, and I'm happy to share. So today I'm going to kind of jump into sort of my vision of maybe a roadmap back to Telemark. And how do we get there, and sort of why is it important? And obviously this is one humble man's opinion. And I'd love to hear your thoughts too. So, once you listen to the episode, feel free to shoot me an email at podcast@freeheellife.com, and let's keep the conversation going. It's really nice to think about this stuff. I think it's incredibly important. So as I kind of jump into this, I went back and kind of looked at some episodes to reference, and they're going to be in the show notes. So if you feel like you're like, Madsen, I hear what you're saying and I'm about to get lost, I think this conversation is not for the faint of heart sometimes. And so anyways, I went back, dug up a couple episodes, and they're in the show notes. I've got 4 that I'm calling out here. Episode number 60, I think, is where everyone should start, which is what is Telemark skiing, the turn, the history, and the word. And then second, episode number 4, going way, way back, 75 millimeter versus NTN Telemark boots and bindings. Number 3, episode number 63, is 75 millimeter Telemark dead? Response and comments. And number 116, the death of 75 millimeters with Taylor Johnson. So I thought these would be some good reference points if maybe you're new to the podcast, or you would just kind of want to brush up, or you're nerding out and you really want to go down the rabbit hole and sort of come along for the ride and understand why I think the way I do about all this craziness regarding 75 millimeter and NTN, what it all means and whatnot. But those are some good reference points to start with. Excuse me. It's always hard when I'm rolling solo, right? Because it's like I got to drink some water, and then the next thing I know, probably sounds like I'm drinking water on the show. So it's always kind of funny. Got to keep that throat clear. Okay, so I was trying to think, like, where do I even start with this? Because I think it's a very big topic in some ways, and in some ways I think it's an incredibly simple topic, or should be simplified. And where I think the best place to start this conversation and sort of start this roadmap is, I always like to sort of assess the situation. What is the scenario going on? And I think the best place to start is the public perception of boots and bindings. And I was thinking about, even within that, there's sort of a quick breakdown that I would propose, which is the old telemarkers perception, the newer telemarkers perception, and thirdly, people who don't telemark yet and their perception. And so let's start with the public perception. Again, this is me sharing my opinion on stuff. So I humbly accept your critique, your additional opinions, or whatever you may have to add. If nothing else, maybe you're listening to this in your car and you're going to be like shouting, "All right, right on, man." Or you're screaming at it. You're screaming at your radio or your radio, like I'm not on the radio. You know what I mean? You're screaming at the podcast player of your choice, and you just completely disagree. Either way, I think it's healthy for us to have a diverse set of opinions when it comes to this. So back to what I was saying. Old telemarkers perception. So here's my take on it. Old telemarkers are interesting, and to even put a finer point on it, kind of define older telemarker, someone who has been telemarking for a number of years. I would even say like 10 plus or 5 plus. And we still see customers at Freeheel Life. They've been telemarking since the 1970s. So, put that in your pipe and smoke it. I mean, that's a long time, right? That's a lot of gear, and it's a lot of time. It's a lot of evolution of gear. And so the perception of the older telemarker for me is there's sort of one group of old school telemark skiers that are always evolving and always excited to move forward. And then there's a second group that is probably doesn't care a whole lot. They're not really that interested in the new stuff, but they don't really hate the new stuff. They just kind of use what they got. And I think that's a large majority of people sort of in the middle. You know, they're not actively seeking out new stuff to use. And so they just kind of have what they have. And then there's this third group of older Telemark skiers that are sort of like, screw this, man. Everything was better when it was leather. You know what I'm saying? Like, they're just grumpy. And I'm not totally sure why that is. We all get set in our ways. I'm going to kind of address this later on, sort of in the finale of sorts. But I want to start here. These are sort of these older Telemark skiers. Some of them want to see evolution in equipment. Some just kind of have whatever and don't really care and aren't actively participating in the growth of, or the evolution of the product. And then there's people that are just like, why are we changing anything? This is stupid. So that's public perception, in my opinion, of the older telemarker. Now, the newer telemark skier, I'm talking like 5 years or less, you've been telemark skiing. So your perception of telemark sort of already includes this new stuff, right? Like, you know, we're far into having NTN. So if you're not familiar with NTN, it is new Telemark norm. So that's the latest iteration of boot and binding interface in Telemark skiing. When we refer to 75 millimeter, that is the measurement of the duck bill boots, square-toed boot. 75 millimeters is the width across that, and it's called the old Nordic norm, or the Nordic norm, I guess, not old, but since we've got new Telemark norm, and we're going to call that the old Nordic norm. So if you've only been telemark skiing like kind of in this last 5 years, there's a really good chance that you are for sure familiar with NTN. Just by default that it's been around. So NTN came out in 2008 with the original the original TX boot from Scarpa and the Rotofella free ride binding. So, I mean, we're far into this. I mean, we're going into the 15-year mark here, right? So, it's been a while, and chances are, if you just started telemark skiing, you're either on NTN, or maybe you bought used equipment, or you could have even bought new. You could have bought new equipment, but I would venture to say, if you're on 75 millimeter and you started in the last 5 years, you most likely picked up some 75 millimeter gear used or at a discount, but you were aware of the new Telemark norm, as it were. So just in this little synopsis, I think you're seeing exactly why I've always said, at some point, this all becomes telemark again, okay? And it's sort of necessary from a simplicity standpoint. I mean, the fact that we're even breaking this down like this probably already confused and made people shut this podcast off. They're probably like, what? Especially if you're in that middle group. Okay, so that kind of breaks down that second group, the newer telemarker within the last 5 years. Your public perception of boots and bindings is sort of like, yes, I know there's NTN and I'm probably on it, or yes, I know there's NTN. I was looking for 75 millimeter equipment because that's what was available. That was what's on the used market. That's what my friend gave me. Whatever, various things, but your awareness of the two platforms is there. So the third public perception group that I was going to bring up is people who don't telemark yet, right? Because from a sport perspective, if we want to call it that, I mean, skiing is a sport. I mean, it's something you do. It's an individual sport. Yes, it can be competitive, A lot of times it's not. People are just out having fun. But, you know, we're looking to grow the participation, right? Because as we get in and talk about gear, participation is really the foundation of being able to finance research and development. People are interested in starting companies that make equipment for telemark skiers, and that's what it's all about. So driving participation is incredibly important. And if you just if we just kind of stay stagnant, I mean, this is going to go nowhere, and kind of this conversation is a moot point. It kind of doesn't matter, you know, like we'll crush ourselves by not promoting it. So let's assume that we're doing our job of spreading Telemark and getting the word out and sharing it with our friends and family and neighbors and all those other people around us. And we want them to also get pitted and learn how to telemark ski in the big white fluff, because that's what it's all about. But I will say the public perception of people not getting into telemark, I am going to venture out and say, here's, if I was not a telemark skier, and I'm the type of person who kind of wants to get in and do my research, I think the perception of people getting into telemark is, this is kind of complicated. Like what do I get? Like, what equipment? Like, is this boot going to work? What about this binding? Or this guy gave me this awesome boot, and then like I found this binding online. Oh wait, it doesn't work together. So, I mean, you can see the basic point of this is multiple norms just kind of causes confusion. And, you know, especially when I was working up front in the shop more, I mean, this is even years ago, before Taylor took over the shop manager position, and now Miles is running it. You know, people would come in and literally, it was a very good experience to see how the internet functions and how a small group of people being incredibly loud about something seemed to permeate the conversation before people even ended up in a shop with expertise that could help guide them. And what I mean by that is, you know, in the introduction of this, I was reading Bobby T. He talks about 75 millimeter NTN, TTN, TTS. Just to give some definition about those, because some of these terms kind of are more what you might come across if you're part of this latter group of just, I'm somebody who's like, haven't even got into telemark. Maybe you're a curious telemark person that wants to get into it this season, and you picked up this podcast. God forbid this is your first introduction to it. But it is a good conversation. And so Bobby Tusela, so just to go through that, we talked about 75 millimeter. We talked about NTN, TTN. This is something that may not have even ever happened, which is a Telemark tech norm. And then there's TTS, which is sort of aligns a little more with the bindings, which is Telemark tech system, and utilizes, has the ability to utilize a non-NTN boot that is an alpine boot that has a bellow or a flexible zone over the ball of the foot. So there's a lot of sort of alphabet soup going on there with numbers and letters. And it's basically what I'm trying to say is, if you haven't gotten into telemark yet and you see all of those little abbreviations, it's tricky, and you're probably not going to know what's going on. Okay, so this is the scenario. You got old telemarker, new telemarker, people who don't telemark yet, and there's a variety of reasons why people are probably confused across all of those categories. So I just kind of wanted to set the stage with that from my perspective, what I've seen, and sort of my experience, you know, dealing in retail in the last 7 years and various other projects prior to that. I think a simple note of what could help us in general is in Telemark, and this is kind of gone on forever, but just what I'm proposing here is a unification of ideas as we move into the future. So the next question is, what are we trying to achieve? And the two things I want to break this into is, what are the manufacturers trying to achieve? And what are the end users, you and I? What are we trying to achieve as a end user of the product? So for this specific conversation, we're talking about Telemark boots and bindings. Excuse me. So let's start with the manufacturers. What are they trying to achieve? Sometimes I wonder. No, but in all seriousness, there's not, number one, let's talk about how many manufacturers actually are dealing with Telemark equipment. It is not that many. So we're talking about 3 total boot manufacturers in the entire world. And we're talking about a handful of binding companies in the entire world. So as far as again, this is an opinion piece. So I'm just taking as much data and experience as I can and sort of consolidating it into this roadmap, if you will. As far as the manufacturers, what I think they're trying to achieve is, I think they're trying to achieve a boot that works for the majority of people out there. Now, I will say, and we've gotten into this, and there's other podcasts to reference with this, sometimes I think the boot manufacturers are a little out of touch with what is actually needed out there. So when I pose the question about what are they trying to achieve, I'm not kidding in saying that I think sometimes they don't know what they're trying to achieve. And that's difficult. Now, that could be seen as negative, but I don't want it to be negative. I just think it's a resource issue. And I always, again, another topic I'm always talking about is, we need to build our own industry. And, I'm totally the hardcore guy that's like, yeah, I would love to see a Telemark boot made by a company that only makes Telemark products, because, and this goes with, yeah, you could be a manufacturer of all sorts of things and make Telemark boots. All I care about is that you're in tune with the groups of people out there that we're talking about. That's important. So going back to what the companies are trying to achieve, I think what they're trying to achieve is making a boot that works and moving towards NTN. So on the positive side, I do think that the good part about reading data, if you don't know what the hell is going on in the world, is you're probably seeing as a boot manufacturer that more people are buying NTN boots at this point, which is true based on the analytics I've seen and spoken to people about. We're well beyond the 50% mark. I mean, and we have been for years. And so what I mean by that is more people are buying NTN boots, new NTN boots, than they are buying new 75 millimeter boots. So from that perspective, it's kind of a savior. The data, the spreadsheet reader at the boot companies, I think that is a savior for us as a community, because regardless if the guy running the boot program somewhere knows what's going on or not, it's easy to read the numbers and go, okay, yeah, like we need to go this direction. So to sort of add some factual knowledge to that, we're in just this past year, you've got crispy calling out that Crispy's going to be getting rid of the XP boot, one of their 75 millimeter boots. And the Scarpa T1 is no longer going to be made. So, I mean, these are the two players right now. I know I said there's three, but I unfortunately think Scott is probably going to pull the plug on Telemark boots at some point. Whole nother discussion. We've talked about it before. Feel free to go dig on that, or we can touch on that some other time. But as far as moving forward from 75 millimeter, I mean, the boot companies are trying to achieve that already. So you're starting to see the trim happen and the consolidation of resources go into NTN. Now, that NTN, so what I think they're trying to do there is just, again, there's not a lot of resources in these companies, so they're probably just trying to put more effort into what is happening. I'll just give a little sidebar to that. The TTN Telemark Tech Norm, this was something that was sort of, we reported on telemarkskier.com a couple years ago. Craig Dostie sort of threw this out there in sort of the rumor mill that maybe there was a different type of boot other than an NTN boot, but it was kind of like an NTN boot. And it was kind of all hearsay, and it's not something that's on the market, but I will just put it out there. Like, I would think it's crazy if any boot manufacturer were to go down a road other than NTN at this point. Because we have so many bindings. Again, I said 2008 is when NTN comes out, and now you've got a multitude of other options. I make it sound so much better than it is. You have a couple of options that you can clip into, and that's pretty much it. So, but I don't think that's, I think the boot manufacturers they need to just kind of stay in the lane of NTN. That's pretty much it at this point. Okay. Real quick, we'll go back to kind of more manufacturer stuff. What does the end user want? This is an interesting thing because I know that we at Freeheel Life Industries, we're trying to collect some more data and understand people. And I appreciate all of you. Like we did a survey at the end of the season, and we're starting to try to compile those numbers to help us understand things better. But that's what it takes, right? Like we want to understand what the thought process is of the consumer out there so we can make stuff, you know? We're obviously not making boots, but we are making skis now and doing stuff like that. So we want to understand what you guys are thinking out there, because that's important to us. So when we talk about what the end user in Telemark wants, I'm just going to put it out there. The end user in general wants something that works and is semi-affordable within the marketplace. Okay? That's really what's going on. I think the secondary side of that is when I say that, if I were to pose that question to certain group of telemark skiers, instead of thinking that, like, hey, we need something that's going to retain more telemark skiers and get more new people into the sport, and yada yada yada. There's a group out there that I honestly don't think is that big. But when you ask what the end user wants, they're like, we need a lightweight boot. All right. That's all we care about. We're backcountry skiers, lightweight boot. And that's like, it's literally like the record broke. It's on repeat. Okay. Lightweight boot. I get it. But here's what's so funny about the data that we are seeing, and even before we start doing these surveys and talking to people, I'll tell you, the loud group that's just saying lightweight boot, which I also would love to have that in the quiver, but the majority of people are in the resort, into story. So the ability to create the financing to have a larger selection of boots, it's going to come in the resort. So that's what, and it needs to function. So I think that's what we need to, this is my perception of this is the end user just needs a boot that's going to work great. And we'll get into like what that means a little bit later here, but the end user just needs a boot that works correctly and performs well. And I say semi-affordable. I mean, telemark skiing is not the cheapest sport. I wish it was. It's not. But I think trying to create a boot that works for the majority of people, that's, I think, what the end user's looking for. And quite frankly, people just want something new. Like, give them a new color. Do something. We haven't seen a new boot in a while. So, to combine the two, end user, manufacturer, I think what everybody wants is we want to see more motion in the ocean. You know what I'm saying? Like, let's keep this thing moving. It's just stagnant. Like, there's no new boots. We have great boots on the market right now. Great boots for the majority of people. There's awesome Telemark boots for this specific type of stuff, like lightweight backcountry boots. We need some more R&D. We need some time, but it's not to say that we can't grow the sport with what we got. So anyways, that's kind of my 2 cents on what are we trying to achieve? What are the manufacturers trying to do and the end users trying to get out of it? So now that I've kind of touched base on that, I want to define what is Telemark to the consumer, okay? And part of why I gave that reference material about what is episode number 1 or episode number 60, what is Telemark skiing, the turn, the history, the word. This kind of goes back to this part. But what is Telemark to the consumer is kind of all over the place, because the word gets used incorrectly all the time. And what we got to do first is, I think the manufacturers and the end users, we all need to get on the same page about what Telemark is. Okay? So, unfortunately, the word Telemark kind of gets thrown around like all these different things. Like, some people think Telemark's backcountry skiing. Some people think Telemark's, backcountry skiing, hiking, old school. Some people think Telemark is the ability, like rolling hills and walking through the woods. Some Telemark skiers think that it's freeheel tricks in the park. There's so many different facets and subgroups of Telemark skiing that sometimes it makes it a little bit hard for the gear to get a clear picture of what gear is needed. And so a lot of this, and it's okay that it's like this, but I think it does cause some confusion because sometimes we're all saying different things and using the same word. So it's kind of interesting how that works. So how I define, let me give the definition of Telemark skiing that I think would work best for this roadmap. Is I think we all need to agree that Telemark is a downhill technique on freeheel equipment that cannot be locked down. Okay, so what Telemark is it's a style of turn. It's making a turn. Okay, and can you make a Telemark turn on a variety of skis? Yes. Can you make a Telemark turn on a variety of boots and bindings? Yes. But what you are doing in throughout the process, I mean, the reason I'm bringing this up is you could easily be like walking on the rolling hills of the Midwest on a scaled ski, and you might make a Telemark turn throughout the whole day, but you're really just kind of walking around and cruising. like, is that Telemark? Well, you're making a Telemark term, but, you know, in some regards, we kind of need to look at, you know, we need to kind of look at Telemark as a downhill technique and not just like the walking people that are sort of Nordic and sort of have roots of Telemark, and it kind of looked like the gear back in the 70s and 80s, but now it's kind of something different. Like, we kind of just need to hone in on what Telemark is in 2022, and it's a downhill technique. Now, we might want, like I said, you might want a lightweight boot, you might want a lightweight binding, you might want a lightweight ski, and you're a backcountry skier, or you might be inbounds and you're not too worried about weight, and that offers a wide variety of stuff too. To me, that's where we're at in 2022. Okay. So I hope we all can agree on that to more or less what I'm explaining. The Telemark consumer is not a Nordic skier. It's its own thing, and it's not a downhill ski or an alpine skier, you know, or something like that. It's its own thing. It's a downhill technique. You're not locking your heel. That's it. So the second thing we need to do on this roadmap in this section of it is to recognize what's actually already happening in the marketplace. And I think this is kind of an overlooked part of this whole thing, is the natural evolution of stuff, I think, is kind of in favor of this kind of concept we're talking about. Like, I mean, sure, I can get on a podcast and talk a bunch of shit and be like, all right, cool. Like, here's the roadmap. Like, we should all follow, and this is my ideas and whatever. And everybody's got all these ideas. But, you know, one thing that I think we all should kind of look at is just the natural evolution of what's going on out there already. And so the first thing is, what bindings are in the marketplace? Because if we're trying to consolidate and unify towards NTN, I guess if I wasn't clear on that earlier, that's what I'm proposing. Because it makes no difference, right? Like, all we're trying to do is get a singular way of fastening the boots that are produced, which are NTN boots, trying to get them fastened to the skis, which is a currently called an NTN binding. We're just trying to all get it in that zone. Okay. So when you look at what bindings are in the marketplace right now, let's look at this objectively, because if anybody's fighting 75 millimeter versus NTN, and I always say that's, in my opinion, the dumbest thing that we could do is sit here and try to make it this versus this. Like, there is absolutely no point to that. There's no sales data. There's no nothing. There's not even an argument from a simplicity standpoint. Like, if someone were like fighting over like 75 millimeter is better because it's like easier to get new people into the sport, for instance, I'd be like, that doesn't even make any sense. It's actually much, much harder to adjust the bindings, to do all sorts of stuff. So let's talk about that. What bindings are in the marketplace? So let's talk what is even left with 75 millimeter bindings? So the first one that always comes to my mind is Volet. So Volet is sort of, you know, historically a backcountry brand that really grew through Telemark. And, you know, a lot of people consider them a Telemark brand. They're not. They're a backcountry brand. They'll even tell you that. I mean, they're definitely not sitting around making stuff just for Telemark skiers. I mean, they have a much broader market, you know, which is fine. I mean, that's always been their business model, so it makes sense. But if you look at their lineup of Telemark bindings, the majority of what you think about is the Switchback X2, the women's Switchback, the 3-pin binding Mountaineer, the 3-pin traditional cable, and the 3-pin cable hardwire. And now they are releasing a newer version of their TTS, Telemark Tech System, which is not NTN because it's not attaching to the second heel of an NTN boot. You can actually use like an F1 boot or something like that. It's the OG of where Tech-Toe came from, TTS, Telemark Tech System. You can use an NTN boot, but technically it's not an NTN binding. So Volet is, for all intents and purposes, other than Volet sort of dipping their toes into TTS, which here's my opinion on that. It's sort of 10 years behind. Like, they're not innovating on anything. I haven't skied on the new version that's coming out, but folks, here's the thing. There's no innovation. Like, you have all these other bindings out there with Tech-Toe, and that's not going to compete with it. It has its place from a simplicity standpoint. I definitely like the idea of TTS in terms of simplicity, but overall, Volet is a 75 millimeter brand. Okay, so they're holding the fort down on 75 millimeter. The Mountaineer 3-pin, it's a 3-pin binding. So you're either this is that crossover that I was talking about. That's sort of going to be, you're going to find that in a Midwest Nordic shop, just as much as maybe somebody's going to put a retro setup together and want a 3-pin, but it's more likely going to be the first option. There's a couple more nut jobs like me that like to have sort of that 3-pin setup, and I'm going to go buy a new one or something and put it together. So 75 millimeter, that's Volet, huge deal. Then you've got what's left of 75 millimeter over on the 22 design side. So you've got the axle and the vise. Okay. Great bindings. My personal opinion is axle is probably the pinnacle of 75 millimeter bindings, just from a durability, badassness standpoint. You know, I also like the switchback, but there's a quick argument with like hole mounting patterns and whatnot. You know, you've got 6 holes on the 22 stuff. You've got 4 holes on the majority of the stuff over on, switchback, X2, all that stuff. So just where we're at, I think that's a great choice. So when you're talking 75, as far as like, you got Bishop out there. Bishop has a 75 millimeter version of the BMF, is a transition piece into NTN. But even that, the idea that you can change the toe to NTN, the idea from my understanding has always been like, hey, you didn't want to make the boot switch, so buy this, and then you can upgrade the toe cage later, and then when you get new NTN boots, like, it's going the direction we're talking about. It's going towards unification. So, and then other bindings on the market. You've got M Equipment making the Majo. It's Tech-Toe NTN, and this is pretty much it. Okay, so Black Diamond's out of business in terms of 75 millimeter bindings long ago. 01, 02, gone. You've got, we could go through endless binding brands that aren't around. G3, gone. No Enzo, no Targa. They never went down the NTN route. So that's all gone. Has been for years. So these are the bindings that are being manufactured. Okay. And that kind of just gives you the lay of the land. You know, then you've got, just to kind of touch base real quick on NTN stuff, you know, you've got 22 Designs making the Outlaw X. They've also got the Lynx, which is a Tech-Toe NTN binding. I already mentioned Majo from M Equipment, and then Volet. So that's basically, that's basically, where we're at with stuff. Rotofella's still technically got the Free Ride and the Freedom, both NTN bindings. All of their 75 millimeter was discontinued years ago. At least 4 years. So where that leaves us is you've got a ton of 75 millimeter bindings out there on the used market, but now you're seeing more and more NTN bindings on the market. And really, you got T1 going away on the boot side, and you got XP going away on the boot side. And the point is the move towards unification is naturally happening Most likely because people are just looking at the statistics of who's buying what. Simple as that. So what boots are on the market? Used boots, tons of 75 millimeter boots are out there. But NTN's been around since 2008. So now you've got a lot of NTN boots on the market. Okay. So kind of the same thing. We've already touched on this. T1's going, XP's going. You can see that the Crispy and Scarpa being the main manufacturers, they're making moves going towards NTN. I don't anticipate them making some other boot. Definitely not making 75 millimeter boots. Okay. And so I think what we need to do is just speed up that process. And it's already happening. They're going to make choices on numbers because I honestly don't think they're that tuned in. You know, they're probably not listening to the Freeheel Life podcast. If you are, shout out Crispy and Scarpa. You know, hopefully you're getting something out of this. But I think it's naturally happening what we're talking about. And I think there's going to be, I think what will be interesting with people like Volet is I think you're going to see them they're either going to need to get into the NTN market, not TTS, but like backcountry, probably a Tecto NTN setup, and innovate on something that's not 10 years old more. And if they get in, that'll be super interesting. I'll be very interested. And I think you're going to see 22 designs start to phase out Vice and Axle. I will touch on the kids thing here shortly, but I think that's what you're going to see. You're going to see more focus on Outlaw. You're going to see more focus on Outlaw X. And honestly, I think what's going to happen is binding companies that are more tuned in, like 22 Designs or maybe a Bishop or an M Equipment. These are actually true Telemark companies. 100% of their focus is on the market and on the community. And I think what they're going to realize is there is a shitload of people in the resort, and they're going to start going, you know what? I probably need to start making a non-tour mode that's going to bring the cost down a little bit because there's no tour mechanism. And that's probably what you're going to see. So quick synopsis on that. I know I'm just blowing up your brains with a bunch of stuff right now, but I think what's happening is the marketplace is shifting on its own. So when we're talking roadmap, you know, thankfully we're so far into this. I mean, it's so funny because 2008 was a long time ago. Okay. Like I said, this is well over a decade. Okay. But it's naturally happening, you know, and things are starting to phase out. So I think what you're going to see is 75s just kind of go away, but it's going to take a while to fade out because, you know, the boots are getting chopped, which is a good thing, but there's so many used 75 millimeter boots on the market and people that don't need to upgrade boots yet. Yeah, sure. Keep making 75 millimeter bindings. If anything, I would encourage the companies to keep making the bindings if they want to, if they're making money. But what I think is what could be the detriment of a company like Volet is if they don't move forward with NTN, they're going to get smoked. And they could easily hold on to 75 and be like, all right, yeah, we're just going to make 75. Do the switchback rules. You know, 3-pin cable rules. We're just going to keep making this stuff. People are buying it. Yeah, well, go for it. But what's going to happen is if you just rely on like TTS as your only offering that sort of works with NTM, but it's not an NTM binding, you're going to get smoked one of these days. And someone's going to come in and just dominate even more. I mean, arguably 22 Designs is just dominating in North America. And anyways, I think that's what's going to happen, you know, is just naturally speaking, we're almost out of the 75 millimeter woods, if you will. I mean, we're in NTN. I mean, more people are buying it. I don't have the exact stats in front of me, but it's well over 50%. I mean, I would venture to say we're in the 70 percentile at this point of new NTN being purchased versus 75. And now that you clip those boot options, I mean, it's gone. So, the only other thing I'd say is, locally speaking, you might be someone going, no way, man, like blah, 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 and this doesn't make sense. Well, honestly, people that aren't selling NTN, like if you're not seeing a lot of NTN in your area, it's probably because your shop doesn't know much about it that you buy from. And it's a resource issue. It's not like it's not there. Like it's just that they might be pushing 75 on you still, saying that it's better, but they probably just don't know how to sell you the right NTN stuff. So that's kind of my 2 cents on that. Okay. So as we kind of start wrapping this up, I wanted to sort of bring these outliers into the mix, and I've sort of hinted at it through this conversation, but the two that come to mind are, number one, the T4 from Scarpa boot, which is a 2-buckle, low-cuff plastic boot. Looks more like a leather boot than it does than like a tall, aggressive, like downhill performance Telemark boot in 2022. So T4, and then also kids boots. I want to kind of throw that out there. Kids boots, if you follow any of our stuff, they got cut. They're not even getting manufactured. G-Rex molds are out there somewhere. And, Scott's pulling the plug on that. Scarpa no longer makes the TJ. They haven't for a number of years, probably a decade. I don't know the exact year. But where I see 75 being good, if 75 survives in any way, shape, or form, is I think it should survive. There should be a 75 millimeter Nordic norm for a boot like the T4, which I do not think should go away because there's so many applications for it from, you're starting to see this more. There's sort of this rugged touring crowd, it's basically like touring, like I keep saying, rolling hills, in Salt Lake where it's like, bigger mountains, you're getting people walking their dog up the canyon and, like you're cruising, fish scaled skis, like old XCD style, cross country downhill XCD style skis. And they're using them to, it's a trail walking ski. This isn't like I'm going to ski some crazy sick line and drop ridiculous cliffs, et cetera, et cetera. So that is really, I see that T4 being an awesome option, and the sizing goes down low enough that I actually think the T4 could be an incredibly good boot for young Telemark skiers. Now, that could be where the crossover happens with, it could be where the crossover happens with some of this Volet stuff too, because a 3-pin cable, for instance, 3-pin cable is a fantastic combination with like a T4 boot. Okay, so the T4 boot could be good on all sorts of fronts. Sort of that rugged touring person that's out rolling the hills, and you're like a telemarketer, but you're kind of looking for more just a lightweight Nordic setup that's a little wider, and it's not NNN, new Nordic norm. Too many new stuff. Kids boots 100% should stay 75 millimeter until or if there ever is an NTN boot that can be soft enough to get kids into Telemark. Because here's the thing, you want to grow Telemark, and this is why I say, if you really want people focused on growing Telemark, you got to start with youth. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows that that has to be available, and there needs to be better education around it. But synopsis, if 75 millimeter survives in the sense of, I don't even like to use the word survive, but that's a great place for it. Kids boots, T4 style 2 buckles, that are for more of that crossover quiver type of thing into the Nordic realm of stuff. That's where I see 75 going. Other than that, you're going to have millions, tens of thousands of 75 millimeter boots on the used market that are available for people to get into Telemark. And that's the only other place I really see it. From a new manufacturing standpoint, there's absolutely no point, in my opinion, to invest into Telemark equipment that's 75 millimeter based, whether it's boots or bindings moving forward. There's no unification in that. The public interest doesn't appear to be even in that direction. And people who have not yet acquainted themselves with Telemark are not even going to know it's there, because we're so far into the NTN realm at this point that it's just kind of pointless. So as far as that used gear stuff, is it a conundrum that there's all these 75 millimeter boots out there? No, parts are still available. I would suggest that the manufacturers keep making parts available for a while. And then you can phase those out. I mean, it's been done. G3's phased out the G3 Target. You can't even find cables anymore, and then that pushes people over to maybe like a Volet switchback or something like that. But yeah, I mean, like, we carry tons of used parts because it's great. Keep your stuff, keep your kit going. There's no reason to do that. And I don't think the used gear market really affects the unification process and this roadmap of getting to one boot binding combination that's going to unify us back into, hey, this is a Telemark boot and a Telemark binding. The used stuff is used stuff. And that's it. And let it ride. That's cool. As long as it's getting people into the turn, I'm down. So, and then let it phase itself out. You know what I'm saying? Let nature take its course on it. So, so the focus, in my opinion, needs to shift from norms into a singular norm with the widest variety of options and customization. So this is kind of what I want to end on in terms of the roadmap. We've talked consumers, we've talked manufacturers. Where do we end up? My hope is that we unify into Telemark, meaning one boot and binding interface, but with the caveat that we have lots of different options. So options meaning you can find the flex that you like in the boot. You can find the flex that you like in the binding. You can find the stiffness of springs in the binding. There's different pivot points. The boot flexes are everything from super stiff to super soft. And if we are this isn't really a norm conversation. And I think people get so caught up in 75 versus NTN. And I'm like, this is so silly. It's literally how your boot attaches to the ski. But I think what people mean to say without really knowing what they're saying, they think it's like a norm versus a norm, when really what they're saying is, I don't care how it attaches to the ski, my boot and my binding. I just want it to feel the way that I want it to feel. So my hope is that as boot and binding manufacturers trim 75 millimeter out, my hope is that they put their focus into creating more variety of what we would now call NTN, more variety into the boot and binding options, so that the customer has the ability to achieve the feel of their 75 millimeter bindings that they're coming from, and that from there, we're able to develop more and more and more into a deeper, richer availability of equipment. And I think that's it. So it's not about the norm. It's just about getting the feel correct and having a wide variety of stuff. So folks, that is my roadmap. That is my opinion on how we get from where we're at now and where I think we should end up being. I do not think it's actually going to take that long. like I said, we're way further into this over a decade where a lot of this has naturally started to occur. I would love to see a more proactive approach from the companies because they are in touch with the community and they're in touch with what people want. I think that this is totally doable, and it's incredibly necessary for us to move into the next phase of what we're doing. And I think it's going to come to pass. I think we just got to stick with it, and we got to keep doing our thing and whatnot. So I hope you enjoyed that sort of line of thinking and sort of just free flow. I always appreciate you guys listening to everything I'm doing. It's amazing to have the opportunity to talk about Telemark. Literally just switch this thing on and let it flow. Again, shout out to Bobby T for giving me the opportunity to expand my thoughts, and thanks for the interest in wanting to hear more of my thoughts on the subject. So, as always, if you want to stay in tune with everything that we're doing, sign up for the mailing list. You can get the link in the show notes. You can always be on our social media too. If you like to burn the day away with us doing ridiculous stuff and posting awesome photos and videos of dropping knees. You can get a hold of me direct, podcast@freeheellife.com. You can hit up the crew at the shop. They're there Monday through Friday. You can hit them up at customerservice@freeheellife.com. And much love and appreciation for all of you out there. I love doing this. I would love to hear your thoughts. If you're an Apple Podcast subscriber, please rate and review. Take just a couple words. Always helps out. I always like to read those, get some feedback, and you all are amazing. So I'll see you next week. And until then, friends and family and protectors of the turn, spread Telemark always. Peace out.